Picture this. It's a Tuesday afternoon. Nothing special about it. You're at work, you're grinding, maybe thinking about what you're having for dinner, and then your phone rings. It's your mechanic, and he says those words that just make your stomach drop. Hey, so the repair is going to run you about $1,800. And your heart just sinks. Not because $1,800 is the end of the world, but because right now, at this exact moment, you have $240 in your checking account and about $80 in savings. And so you do what millions of Americans do every single day. You say, okay, just put it on my card. And then you hang up and you stare at the wall for a second, and somewhere in the back of your mind, a little voice goes, this is fine. People do this all the time. Credit cards exist for emergencies. And here's the scary part. That voice isn't entirely wrong. People do this all the time. But doing something all the time doesn't make it smart. And what I want to do today is show you exactly what that moment, that one $1,800 decision actually costs you. Not just in dollars, but in sleep, in stress, in the kind of low-grade financial anxiety that just follows you around like a shadow that you can never quite shake. My name is John, and I spend way too much time thinking about emergency funds, like an uncomfortable amount of time. I've read the studies, I've run the math over and over, I've talked to people who've been on both sides of this, the people who had cash when the roof caved in, and the people who reached for the credit card and spent the next 2 years paying for it. If you're someone who's living paycheck to paycheck, or you technically have savings, but you know deep down it wouldn't survive a real emergency, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if it helps you out. Because what I'm going to share with you today genuinely changed the way I think about money, and I think it's going to do the same for you. Let's get into it. Okay, so first I want to challenge something. I want to challenge this idea, this very widespread, very accepted idea that credit cards are a perfectly reasonable substitute for an emergency fund. You hear this all the time. You might have even said it yourself. Oh, I don't really need a ton of cash sitting around. I have a credit card with a $5,000 limit. That's basically my emergency fund. I get it, I really do. On the surface, that logic seems fine. The money's there when you need it, right? You swipe the card, the emergency gets handled, life moves on. But here's the thing. This thinking has a fatal flaw buried inside it, and most people never see it until they're already stuck in a hole that takes years to climb out of. And I want to prove it to you with math, because I think numbers cut through the noise better than anything else. Let's start with a really basic scenario. Let's say you have an emergency. Car breaks down, water heater gives out, you need a last-minute flight because a family member is in the hospital. Doesn't matter what it is. It costs you $3,000. That's actually pretty close to the average unexpected expense that American households face in a given year, according to a 2023 survey from Bankrate. Now, you've got two options. Option A, you have an emergency fund. You pull the $3,000 out of your savings account, emergency handled. Done. You feel the sting of watching your savings drop, but you're fine. You're not paying anyone anything extra for the privilege of solving your problem. Option B, you don't have an emergency fund. You put $3,000 on your credit card. The national average for credit cards right now, as of 2024, is sitting at around 21.5%. That's not a made-up number. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has been tracking this, and it has been climbing. So you've got $3,000 at 21.5% interest. Now here's where it gets really interesting, and most people skip right past this part. Let's say you can only afford to pay $100 a month toward that $3,000 balance. At 21.5% APR, here's what that actually looks like. You're not going to pay that debt off in like 2.5 years. You're going to be making payments for almost 4 years, 46 months to be exact. And by the time you're done, you will have paid roughly $4,580 total, meaning that $3,000 emergency cost you $1,580 in interest alone. Let me say that again. You had a $3,000 problem. You solved it with a credit card, and it cost you $4,580. You paid 53% more than the original cost of the emergency just for the privilege of not having the cash ready. That's not a minor inconvenience. That's not a rounding error.
That is the system working exactly as designed, and not in your favor. Now you might be thinking, okay, John, but I would never just pay the minimum. I'd hustle, I'd cut back, I'd pay it off faster. And look, maybe you would. Let's be generous and say you throw $300 a month instead of $100. At $300 a month, you pay off that $3,000 balance in about 11 months, and you'd pay roughly $345 in interest. Still $345 you didn't have to spend. Still money that went to a bank instead of your future. But yeah, it's better. Here's the problem, though. That calculation assumes the emergency happens in a vacuum. It assumes that after you swipe that card for $3,000, nothing else goes wrong. No other surprises, no other expenses, your income stays exactly the same, your life cooperates perfectly while you're paying down this debt. And you and I both know that's not how life works. Here's what most people don't realize. Emergencies are not rare, isolated events. They cluster. The same 6-month stretch that kills your car might also hit you with a medical bill, or your landlord raises your rent, or you get a smaller bonus than you expected, or your kid needs braces. Life doesn't schedule its chaos conveniently, and when you're already carrying a balance on your credit card from the first emergency, the second emergency doesn't give you a $5,000 limit. It gives you whatever headroom is left, and you're adding interest on top of interest. And now you've got 2 emergencies and 1 credit card and absolutely no cushion between you and financial disaster. This is the trap. This is the actual trap that nobody talks about in those conversations where people say, just use your credit card as your emergency fund. They're not imagining what happens when the second emergency shows up, or the third. They're imagining a clean, isolated, single-incident world that does not exist. Now, I want to talk about something that doesn't get nearly enough attention in personal finance circles, and that's the psychological cost of not having an emergency fund. Because this is massive. This might actually be bigger than the mathematical cost, at least in terms of the damage it does to your daily life. There's a concept in behavioral economics called financial anxiety, and it's not just the feeling of being stressed about money. It's a specific cognitive state where a significant portion of your mental bandwidth is quietly occupied by financial uncertainty at all times. And studies, including a well-known one from researchers at Princeton University published in the journal Science, have found that financial stress actually measurably reduces your cognitive capacity. The researchers found that financial worries can consume the equivalent of about 13 IQ points of mental bandwidth. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the cognitive difference between a good night's sleep and operating on almost no sleep. So when you don't have an emergency fund, and you know, even subconsciously, that you are one bad day away from a financial crisis, it's literally making you worse at thinking. It's making you worse at your job. It's affecting your relationships. It's draining you in ways you might not even consciously connect to your financial situation. I've talked to people who describe this exact experience. They'd be sitting in a meeting at work, and their phone would buzz, and their immediate instinct, before they even looked at the screen, was a flash of dread. Because what if it's bad news? What if something broke? What if it's a bill they forgot about? That's not a healthy way to live. That's financial anxiety running in the background like a program that never closes. And the emergency fund? The emergency fund is how you close that program. There's something they call in financial psychology the insurance effect of emergency funds. When you have money set aside specifically for unexpected events, it doesn't just protect you financially, it changes how your brain processes risk. You stop seeing every incoming unknown as a potential catastrophe because you know you have a buffer. You've given yourself permission to handle things. And that mental shift is worth something you genuinely cannot put a dollar amount on.
Okay, let's talk about how big this emergency fund actually needs to be, because this is where I think a lot of advice falls short or goes too far in a way that's discouraging. You've probably heard the standard recommendation, 3 to 6 months of expenses. And every time people hear that, especially if they're living paycheck to paycheck, they think, that's impossible. And I get it. If your monthly expenses are $3,500, 3 months of expenses is $10,500. 6 months is $21,000. When you've got $200 in your checking account, $21,000 sounds like a different planet. So let me reframe this, because here's the thing, and this is actually really important. The goal is not to build a perfect emergency fund overnight. The goal is to build a functional emergency fund as fast as you reasonably can in stages, so that you're protected at every step of the process. Here's how I think about it. Stage 1 is what I call your $1,000 firewall. Before you do anything else, before you aggressively pay down debt, before you start investing, before you do any of the other stuff that's probably on your financial to-do list, you build up $1,000 in a separate savings account that you don't touch for anything except a genuine emergency. $1,000 is not going to cover a total car replacement, but it covers the car repair. It covers the ER copay. It covers the broken appliance. It covers the most common, most likely emergency expenses that hit people. And having it there, in cash, accessible, changes your relationship with financial risk immediately. I want to illustrate why $1,000 specifically. According to data from the Federal Reserve's annual report on the economic well-being of U.S. households, somewhere around 37% of Americans said they would struggle to cover an unexpected $400 expense. 40%. More than 1 in 3 Americans would be in trouble over $400, and roughly 27% said they would not be able to cover a $1,000 emergency without borrowing money or selling something. So if you can get to $1,000 in cash savings, you are already ahead of more than a quarter of American adults. That's not a small thing. That's actually meaningful protection. Stage 2, once you've got your $1,000 firewall, is 1 month of expenses. For most households in the U.S., that's somewhere between $3,000 and $5,000. 1 month. That's your real baseline. 1 month of cash gives you the ability to handle an emergency without touching debt and still have time to regroup, adjust, and figure out your next move. With 1 month, you're not scrambling. You're operating with a little bit of grace. Stage 3 is the full 3 to 6 months, and this is absolutely where you want to end up. But the path matters, because most people give up on emergency funds because they set the big goal, $15,000, $20,000, whatever it is, and they feel no progress, and then they stop. The stages give you wins along the way. The stages keep you moving. Now let me address something real quickly, because I know some of you are sitting there thinking, John, this sounds great, but my credit card actually gives me points. I get cash back. I get travel rewards. Doesn't that make it better to use the credit card for emergencies? And I love this question because it sounds smart and it feels like a loophole, but let's actually run the math on it because the numbers do not cooperate with this theory. Let's go back to our $3,000 emergency. Let's say you have a rewards card that gives you 2% cash back, which is actually pretty good. 2% on $3,000 is $60 in rewards. $60. That's your prize for using the card. Now let's say you're disciplined and you pay it off in 6 months and you only end up paying about $175 in interest. So you net $60 in rewards, you pay $175 in interest, you're still down $115 compared to just having the cash. The rewards are always going to lose to the interest. Always. Unless you are paying the entire balance off every single month before any interest accrues, which, if you had the cash to do that, you had the cash for the emergency in the first place. The rewards game is only free if you're playing it with money you actually have. The moment you're carrying a balance, the bank wins. The math is not close. It's not a nuanced debate. The interest destroys the rewards. Here's what I really want you to understand, and this is the part where most financial discussions get it wrong, because they treat the credit card versus emergency fund conversation as a math problem. But it's not really a math problem, it's a philosophy problem. It's a question about the relationship you want to have with money and with risk. When you choose to rely on a credit card as your emergency fund, you are making a decision, even if you don't think of it as a decision, to transfer the cost of your bad luck to your future self. You're essentially saying, future me will deal with this. And future you has to deal with it plus interest, plus the stress of carrying debt, plus the reduced capacity to handle the next emergency that's probably coming. The emergency fund is the opposite of that. It's you saying, I'm going to handle this, right now, with resources I've already prepared. It's one of the purest expressions of financial maturity that exists. It's not glamorous, it doesn't go up in value, it doesn't earn 15% a year in the stock market, it just sits there, waiting, and that's exactly the point. There's a concept I love that I think about constantly when it comes to emergency funds, and it's the idea of optionality. When you have cash reserves, you have options. You can negotiate. If your car breaks down and you have $3,000 in the bank, you can take your time, get multiple quotes, decide whether it's worth repairing or whether you should shop for a different car. When you don't have cash and you're on the credit card, you have exactly one option. Fix the problem as fast as possible so you can stop accumulating interest. The emergency dictates the terms. You have no leverage, and that desperation almost always costs you more money on top of the original problem. Let me give you a real-world example of what I'm talking about. I want you to tell you about two different people facing the exact same scenario, and I want you to see how differently it plays out. Person A is Sarah. Sarah has been building her emergency fund for about 14 months. It's not a huge fund. She's got about $5,200 set aside in a high-yield savings account earning about 4.5% APY. That 4.5% is earning her about $234 a year in interest, by the way, which is basically free money just for having the money. Anyway, in March, her apartment floods. Maintenance issue. The landlord is technically responsible but is dragging his feet, and Sarah needs to replace a bunch of personal items, a laptop, some furniture, some clothing, and she needs to pay for a few nights in a hotel while the unit gets dried out. Total out-of-pocket cost, $2,100. Sarah writes the check, or does the bank transfer, it's 2024. Point is, she handles it. Her savings drop from $5,200 to $3,100. She takes a breath. That hurts, but she's okay. She's not carrying debt, she's not paying interest, she starts rebuilding the fund over the next few months. By June, she's back up to $4,500. By October, she's back to where she started. The emergency cost her exactly what it cost, $2,100. That's it. Person B is Marcus. Marcus doesn't have an emergency fund. He's got a credit card with a $4,000 limit, and he thinks of it as his backup plan. Same month, March, Marcus faces his own emergency. Transmission goes out on his car. $2,400 to fix. He puts it on the card. Now, Marcus makes decent money, but he's got other expenses, so he can put about $200 a month toward the credit. At 22% APR, which is actually his card's rate, it's going to take him about 14 months to pay it off, and he'll end up paying about $350 in interest on top of the $2,400. But here's the thing. In month 4, Marcus's refrigerator dies. That's another $800 on the card. And now the math gets worse because he's carrying two balances and the minimum payments are eating into what he could put toward the debt, and he's paying interest on a higher total balance, and it starts to compound. 2 years later, Marcus has paid off all the debt, but he spent about $700 to $900 in interest along the way, and he had 24 months of low-grade financial stress, and he still has no emergency fund because he was focused on paying down debt, not building savings. And now his car needs new brakes. Same world, same kinds of emergencies, two completely different financial outcomes because of one choice made months before any of the emergencies happened.
Now, let's talk about where to keep your emergency fund, because this actually matters more than most people think. Here's the thing. You don't want your emergency fund in your regular checking account. I know that sounds convenient, but that convenience is actually a liability. When the money is right there, mixed in with your everyday spending money, it's too easy to dip into it for things that aren't really emergencies. New shoes aren't an emergency. An Amazon sale isn't an emergency. Concert tickets for a show you've been wanting to see for 2 years aren't an emergency. But when the money is right there, in the same account you use for everything, those purchases stop feeling like they're coming from your emergency fund. They just feel like spending. And slowly, quietly, your emergency fund evaporates. The solution is separation. You want your emergency fund in a dedicated account, ideally a high-yield savings account, that is at a different bank than your primary checking account. Different bank is key, because when the emergency fund is at a different institution, there's a small but meaningful amount of friction involved in accessing it. You have to log in somewhere else. You have to initiate a transfer. You have to wait 1 to 2 business days for the money to arrive. That friction is a feature, not a bug. It gives you just enough pause to ask yourself, is this actually an emergency? And most of the time, when you have to wait 48 hours, the answer is no. And if the answer is yes, if it's a real emergency, 48 hours is fine.
Now, about that high-yield savings account, this is genuinely a no-brainer in today's rate environment. As of early 2024, you can find high-yield savings accounts from online banks paying anywhere from 4 to 5% APY. Compared to the national average savings account rate at a traditional bank, which is sitting around 0.46%, according to the FDIC. That's not a misprint, 0.46%. So if you've got $5,000 in an emergency fund at a traditional bank, you're earning about $23 a year. That same $5,000 in a high-yield savings account at 4.5% earns you $225 a year. Both accounts are FDIC insured. Both are equally safe. One just pays you 10 times more to hold your money. There's no catch. It's just a better account. Marcus's emergency fund, in the example I gave earlier, he didn't even have one. But if he had, and it was in a high-yield account, those interest earnings would have helped offset the slow process of building the fund in the first place. I want to spend a minute on something I think is really underappreciated, which is what I call the emergency fund multiplier effect. And this is where it gets really interesting. When you have an emergency fund, a real one, not a credit card, it doesn't just protect you in emergencies, it actually makes you better at managing money in every other area of your financial life. Here's why. When you have a cushion, you can take calculated risks that are impossible when you're living on the edge. You can negotiate your salary harder because you have 3 months of expenses in the bank and you're not desperate. You can hold out for the right job offer instead of taking the first thing that comes along. You can invest more aggressively in your retirement accounts because you know your day-to-day expenses are protected by a separate pool of money. You can start a side business or a passion project without gambling your rent money on it. And on the other side, when you're always one bad event away from financial crisis, you make worse decisions. Studies on financial scarcity consistently show that people in financial stress are more likely to take high-interest loans, more likely to avoid going to the doctor for things that could be caught early, more likely to stay in bad jobs, and more likely to make impulsive spending decisions as a coping mechanism. Scarcity creates tunnel vision. You can only see the immediate problem right in front of you, and you lose the ability to think long-term. The emergency fund isn't just a financial tool, it's a cognitive tool. It expands your thinking horizon. Let me talk about the math of building an emergency fund, because I don't want to just tell you that you need one. I want to show you that you can actually get there, even if it feels impossible right now. Let's say your target is $5,000. That's a solid 1 to 1.5 months of expenses for most American households. That feels big, but let's break it down. If you save $100 a week, roughly $433 a month, you hit $5,000 in just under 12 months, 1 year. $100 a week sounds like not that much, but it adds up to life-changing money in a year. If $100 a week is too much right now, fine. $50 a week, $216 a month, gets you to $5,000 in under 2 years. 2 years. And during those 2 years, every dollar you accumulate is reducing your exposure. You're not zero until you hit $5,000. Every $100 you save is $100 that doesn't have to go on a credit card if something goes wrong. And here's a thing that I want you to think about. What's the actual source of those savings? Because I'm not here to tell you to eat ramen and never enjoy your life, but let me give you some concrete places where money tends to hide in most household budgets. The average American household spends about $3,000 a year on dining out, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Just cutting that by 30%, not eliminating it, just reducing it, saves you $900 a year right there. That's almost $75 a month. Subscription services, Hulu, Netflix, Disney+, Spotify, random apps you forgot you signed up for, that gym membership you haven't used since February. The average American household now spends over $200 a month on subscription services, according to research from C+R Research. Auditing those subscriptions, and I mean sitting down and actually going through your bank statement line by line, often reveals $40 to $80 that you didn't even know you were spending. Combine those two things, trimming dining out and cutting unused subscriptions, and you're potentially looking at $100 to $150 a month without dramatically changing your lifestyle. That's your emergency fund contribution right there, found money. And that's before we even talk about picking up extra income, selling stuff, or any of the other strategies that can accelerate things even faster.
Now, one thing I want to address before we get to the end here, because I know some of you are in a position where you've got high-interest credit card debt already, and you're wondering, should I be building an emergency fund or paying off my debt first? And this is one of the most common personal finance debates out there. Dave Ramsey says baby step one is a $1,000 emergency fund, then debt, then more emergency fund. Other experts say if your debt is at 20% interest, every dollar you put in savings earning 4% is costing you 16%, so pay the debt. Here's my actual take. Both arguments have merit, but here's the problem with the pay-all-debt-first approach. If you don't have any emergency fund while you're paying down debt and then an emergency happens, you put it on the credit card, and you've just undone months of progress in one moment. You're back at square one, maybe worse than square one, because now you're demoralized too. So here's the framework I think actually works. Get your $1,000 firewall in place first, no matter what, non-negotiable. Then attack high-interest debt aggressively. Then, once the high-interest debt is gone, build the full emergency fund to 3 to 6 months. This is not a perfect sequence mathematically, but it's a sequence that actually works behaviorally, and behavior is what matters most in personal finance, because the best plan is always the one you actually stick to. Look, I want to leave you with this thought, because I think this is the thing that most financial education misses, and it's the thing I feel most strongly about. The emergency fund is not about being afraid. It's not about hoarding money or being pessimistic about the future or not trusting yourself to handle things. It's actually about freedom. It's about having the freedom to face whatever comes at you without flinching. It's about having the freedom to make decisions from a place of choice instead of desperation. It's about building a life where an $1,800 car repair is an annoyance, not a catastrophe. Most of us grew up in households where money was tight, where emergencies were crises, where the conversation around finances was either silent or stressful. And so many of us inherited those patterns, the paycheck-to-paycheck cycle, the credit card as the safety net, the feeling that having money set aside is somehow unrealistic or not for people like us. But here's what I genuinely believe, and I've seen this happen over and over. The moment you have even $1,000 in a dedicated emergency account, something shifts. Something real changes in the way you walk around in the world. You stop dreading the unknown quite as much. You start making decisions with a little more confidence. You stop feeling like you're one bad day away from everything falling apart. That shift starts with $1,000. Then it grows to 1 month, then 3 months, then 6. And somewhere along the way, you stop just surviving financially and you start actually building something. The credit card will always be there. But it should be a convenience tool, not a crisis tool, not your backup plan, not the thing standing between you and financial collapse. You deserve better than that, and more importantly, you can do better than that. Start this week. Open a high-yield savings account if you don't already have one. Set up an automatic transfer, even $25 a week, and watch it build. Name the account something that means something to you. Peace of mind, freedom fund. Not today crisis, whatever it takes to make it feel real and personal and worth protecting. Because here's the truth. Financial security doesn't happen to people. It's built by people, one decision at a time, 1 week at a time. And it starts with the decision to stop using tomorrow's money to solve today's problems and start building a future where you're ready for whatever comes next. That's it for today. If this hit home for you, please give it a thumbs up. It genuinely helps this channel and helps more people find this kind of content. And if you've got a question, drop it in the comments. I read everything. I'll see you in the next one.